well, actually, we need to do something differently. And it's about the experience, not the process. It's about, finding mindsets at play, understanding those mindsets at play, and looking at how we might how we might do things differently, moving from communication to engagement, moving from leadership to that change leadership, leading through change, um, and looking at how do you build trust.
Hi, and welcome to Helping People Perform, the podcast that gives you fascinating insights into those people whose chosen vocation is to help others perform at their best. From consultants to teachers, sports coaches to financial advisors, all of my guests share a passion for getting the most out of individuals, teams, and organisations. Enjoy the episode. Hi everybody, and welcome to another episode of Helping People Perform, where I'm delighted to be joined in the studio today, all the way from Auckland in New Zealand. We were just talking about the fact that I've just come back from there, and unfortunately our paths didn't cross whilst I was there. We have global change strategist and a real thought leader in the world of transformative change leadership. So many wonderful experiences and such a rich history, and a couple of areas where we crossed or could have crossed paths in the businesses that we worked in New Zealand in particular. So welcome to the show today, Allison Ness.
Thank you, Paul. And wow, what an introduction.
I'm really looking forward to this, and yeah, we my time in New Zealand, I work for both Fonterra and for ASB, two companies that I know you've helped along and are helping along as we go. So a couple of amazing businesses that I had some great experiences with, and I'm sure we might have a chance to talk about some of your experiences there as well. But let's go back a little bit and say, what got you to where you are today? What's your story that got you into where you are right now?
Well, Paul, my career choices reflect purpose and passion for transformation, really focusing on people, change, and culture. It's rooted in the fascination of observing mindset and behaviors in action in times of change, like peering into the heart and soul of an organization, understanding how individuals think, act, and how these two dynamics can be harnessed to drive successful change. It was my upbringing that was all about transforming experiences, that and my exposure to other cultural contexts that were instrumental in gaining unique perspectives in how change manifests and the pivotal role of culture in the process. I embraced change at an early age, moving from country to country every 3 years.
Wow.
This forced me out of my comfort zone and into the unknown, but it also provided an opportunity for discovery, lots of resilience and growth, um, and just taking on just different perspectives each time with each different experience. My actually defining moment came from a profound realization of the extraordinary power of individual and collective mindset and behavior in driving sweeping social political change when I witnessed a people revolution in the Philippines in, a long time ago, 1986.
Right.
And then my cross-cultural experiences exposed a worldly and systematic view of the interplay between cultural identity and the psyche of behavior and change.
Right.
For example, when I lived in the Philippines, inequality due to the political and social culture.
Hmm.
When I lived in Singapore, world success was based on that cross culture of Chinese commercialism, Indian, very strong family orientation, and that Malay, gentle, collective, and very positive mindset. And then, if I take it a step further, I was also in competitive swimming as a child, and
Right.
that fused together culture and commerce, the relationship between applying mental skills, that speed, strength, and endurance, with that potential for performance improvement.
Right.
So, all in all, that kind of shaped me as a child and really explains what I do and how I do it and what I've done in terms of the choices that I've made along my whole career journey, but also from a personal lifestyle perspective.
Wow. I mean, what a backstory. I mean, moving every 3 years, you talk about that. I mean, how many countries do you think you've lived in over your years?
Oh, do you know, it's a really good question. I think it was 10 countries and it's split between the Middle East and Asia. So I was born in the Sudan and we then moved to Egypt. Uh, and I think we escaped the first war in Beirut with absolutely nothing. We just kind of up country.
Right.
And then we moved to the Philippines, Malaysia, Singapore, Thailand, before I then headed to Europe to finish my studies.
Wow.
So yeah, whilst it was challenging, yeah, challenging from a you know, who am I? Where do I belong? How do I relate? How do I fit in? But also very insightful in terms of, as I said, how the cultures
Mm.
influence mindset and behavior and shape experiences as a result of that.
Yeah. Oh, that's wonderful because I know from my limited personal experience, that element of noticing and the cultural differences and nuances of living and working in a different country, but I'm sure when once you get more and more of those experiences, then you can sort of build this rich tapestry of what works across everything, what's different, what do I noticing all those different changes. So I'm no doubt as to how formative that could have been in everything that you do. So maybe that brings us nicely then to the work that you do right now. So you talk about sort of transformative change leadership in particular. Can you tell us a little bit more about that and what that means to you?
So, transformative change leadership is really seeing your mindset in action. It's about, as I said, peeling the layers that sit within us. It's a bit like that iceberg effect. What sits underneath us?
Mm,
What are the thoughts? What is the feelings that people have? And enabling them to explore that first in order to really understand how they react to change,
okay.
and then enabling them to respond to change so that you're shifting from that initial fight or flight, and then working through in terms of how might I respond so that I can lead my team and others through change. But you need to look at yourself first and you need to be able to really understand what's causing that reaction, and then working through that.
Yeah, yeah. So I mean, having re-listened, as I was saying before we hit record here, re-listening to your episode on our good friend Jimmy Burrows' podcast, the high performance leader podcast. A great one for any of the listeners to go. If you're liking this podcast, you're going to love Jimmy. So I'll point you in that direction. Share the love. Um, but going back to that whole view of this is about inward looking from a leadership perspective. This isn't or is as much, if not more, about how do I react as a leader to change so that I can understand it and embrace it before I go out and I don't know the right words help the organization change. Not force that change on that organization, but sort of embrace that change in the organization. But ultimately, it comes back to the individual and the individuals first, doesn't it?
Yes, that's right. And what it does is it shifts away from process
Right.
to experience. It
Mm.
shifts away from the what. Very much individuals and organizations reach out to the hands, which is the what. What do we need to do? And then who, what, when, and when.
Yeah.
When actually you need to think about the how. How am I going to actually do it? And before I explore the how am I feeling about it?
Mm.
Um, and it's interesting. We talk a lot about from a I guess historical perspective. We focus on going through change journeys and loss. Yes, there is an element of that, but actually, it's about your experience. It's about being able to adapt. How am I feeling about it? What do I need to do to adapt to it? And that's the journey, not the destination.
Right.
Sometimes it is about loss because it is moving from something old to something new. That's the loss context.
Mm.
But it's really about the experience and it's moving away from that, you know, the hands to the heart.
Mm.
And how do you feel about it? How do you it's the willingness to basically change your behavior. You can be told what to do. And that's from a personal perspective as well as from a business context. We have to change. This is what we need to do. But we don't spend enough time actually exploring well, how do you feel about it? What's the motivation around it? What's your willingness to change?
Mm.
And if there is any change resistance, what is that about? Why have you got the change resistance? People will assume change resistance basically means crossing your hands and going, I'm not going to do it. Actually, that's not really the reality. A
Right.
lot of people want to do it. They either don't know how to do it. So I want to change, but I don't know how to get there. Um, and being told the step-by-step process isn't enough because
Yeah.
that gives some indication, but it doesn't tell me how to take the first step, for example. So I know the steps, but I don't know how to take the step. Or what we're really facing into today, in today's world, is that sense of overwhelm.
Right.
I've got so much going on. My mind is just cluttered with thousand things. Um, and so again, how do I address that overwhelm where I can actually chunk things down
Mm.
and just then take one step forward at a time? But I actually feel I've got someone supporting me. Someone's got my back. And leadership positions are lonely positions.
Yeah.
Once you become a leader from a positional perspective, so you've got the title, you're kind of left on your own. It's
Right.
kind of, way, you've got there, congratulations. And you kind of look around and go, oh, where's the scaffolding? Where's the support structure? It's all gone.
Yeah.
And as you know, our biggest challenge is leadership development programs. Whilst they're really good and they serve a purpose, again, it's actually either a sheep dip approach, so attend this leadership development, or they're very valuable. But again, it's how do you put it into practice,
Mm.
into your operational cadence, into your everyday, when you go back to the office or you come out of that development scenario or situation. It's how you apply it in everyday practices that it becomes normal
Mm.
rather than I've got to carve this in or I've got to add it into my day to day.
Yeah.
So I think that's a really important part, and we underestimate that part in transformation.
Yeah. It's been one of the biggest insights I've had on my career is people will often know what they want to achieve. They'll often know what they need to do to get there, uh, but they might not know how. And the other element to that is they don't know how to stop doing the other thing. How to stop going back to the thing that has got them to where they are right now. And particularly in those high pressure moments, you might have come up with a great new system, a great new process, a great new way of working, put this change in place, and it's working until it gets under pressure, and then everybody falls to type and falls to that sort of safety net. So it's how do you stop people from reverting back to the bad habits? And I
It's a
like,
really good
yeah,
point, right?
yeah,
Yeah, because even just being able to give permission to stop,
mm,
it's an interesting point because I've been having some conversations with leaders of all levels. They can be from CEO down to an individual on the shop floor.
mm,
Everyone's a leader in some shape or form.
yeah,
And in my conversations, that overwhelm keeps coming up.
right,
And the ability to stop, the
mm,
ability to basically pause, slow down to go faster, but also give themselves permission that I actually can stop doing this to enable that, whatever it might be.
yeah,
Um, the words I hear, the language I hear, the emotions I feel, and just the perception of their whole body language is, um, I can't stop.
right,
And they've put that kind of barrier already, and they've come up with 100 reasons, but it's actually holding them accountable by going, well, why can't you? Or because of X, Y, Z. No, no. Well, why can't you? Oh, because of X, Y, Z. And getting to the bottom of it to then go, well, actually, it really sits with you. And also the role, I think the spotlight on if you don't do it, who else will?
Right.
And it's very easy in busyness for leaders also to underestimate the cast that they shadow,
Mm.
the shadow that they cast, sorry,
Yeah.
in terms of people are looking at them. And they forget because they get so busy doing the doing and kind of rallying everybody that people are looking at them going, well, if you're not stopping, then I can't give myself permission to stop. And it's a domino effect.
I had an amazing experience with the first leader that I had at Fonterra, actually. So I'd moved over from the UK. I'd never actually met my boss until day one. I'd had interviews either over the phone, this was pre-Zoom days, and I'd actually met somebody in the UK who was going to be my boss's boss, but wasn't even in the business yet. But we met for an interview there. So I met my boss on the first day, an amazing guy, and then he really sort of transformative leader in his own right, and remains so to this day. And he then took a different role, was leading a team, the optimization team in Fonterra. So typically, well, at the time, it was a very young, fast-paced team of individuals who were doing a lot of the analytics behind where do you put the milk, what do you
Brilliant.
do, big decisions, and all the data
Mm,
analysis, etc., that goes along with it. And remember having conversations about the fact that he was a workaholic. I mean, he was more than happy with this. And once you got into those conversations as to why and how and what was this all about, he just
mm,
this is what he loved doing. But he was casting a shadow of nobody in his team, particularly because they were relatively young, wanted to leave the office until the bosses left. And he's working till sort of 8, 9 o'clock at night every night, and quite happy with that. And he only once this was put to him, he was such a great leader in his own right. He's like, this is not my intention. I want them to go home, and I'm just
mm.
I've got no problem with them going home at whatever time they want, as long as getting the job done. And he came up with a great solution himself, I think it was, where he's like, right, at 5 o'clock. I mean, the Fonterra HQ, eight or nine floors, and so you just go. I'll go to a different floor. I know other people who leave relatively early. I'll go to their office and work from there. So I'm no longer visible to my team, and it gives them the permission to say the boss has left the building. I can now go. And that is, for me, was just an amazing example of leadership and how you influence others and how you impact others on that front. And yeah, it was always a great story to
Absolutely.
go back to.
And a lot of leaders don't, not because they don't do it intentionally,
Mm,
but they forget the impact that they have on
yes.
others, or they don't realize it.
Yeah.
And so the being from a change leadership, conscious from a change leadership perspective, enables you to really take a step back and
Mm,
reflect not only how you are making decisions and why you're making those decisions, but also reflecting on the impact it's having on others, even though they're not intended that way.
yes.
And then what do you need to shift as a result of it?
Yeah.
Um, but also letting the team get to know you better. And that's where the vulnerability comes in, getting them to see you as the human. And in today's world, being a leader on their own
Mm,
is not sustainable.
right.
The pace of change is just accelerating. Transformation, change, leadership, all of these things will continue to increase speed. It's not well, and I've heard this again. Well, we'll just get over COVID. It's gone mad because of COVID. We'll just, soon we'll be over that. Well, guess what? Then there were, you know, uh, weather events, and so it's this cumulative effect of change, which we haven't dealt with
Mm,
before, and it won't be over. It's actually estimated to increase in velocity,
wow.
and impact.
Mm,
When I mean by impact, it doesn't just affect business world; it affects personal lives. It affects communities and society as a whole. So actually, transformation is becoming, whilst it's focused in business, it's actually societal and worldly, and
right.
they are super interconnected.
Yeah.
They're no different in terms of their objectives and their challenges at all.
Yeah. One thing I'm intrigued about, I wrote a little note to so I didn't forget about this, was you talk a lot about this transformative uh, change leadership and it being about introspective and thinking about how change impacts you as an individual. What does that look like? Because I can see how a coach or a mentor or somebody can work with individuals on that case. Is it the same approach with leadership teams? And is that, a similar sort of set of questions that you're asking? Do you have to go start with the individual and then go to the team? Do you start with the team? How do you find that works?
Well, actually, in my experience, I've done a combination of both.
Right.
I don't think there's a hard and fast rule.
Mm,
Um, you definitely need to do a combination of both. I
right.
think that in a team environment, obviously, the individual relationship and the coaching
Mm,
is a supportive, supporting mechanism. But I do think it's a team simply because of my earlier comment. You just can't do it alone.
no.
Without the team, you can't transform
Right.
anything, quite frankly. And we know that as leaders who lead teams. I know from my previous experience where I've led small teams, but also some very big teams. Without them, I couldn't have done what I did.
Mm,
And from an organizational perspective, we couldn't have done what we needed to do in terms of taking the organization on that journey of change and transforming, whether it was cultural transformation, system transformation, whatever the context is. So I think the team is extremely important. And what that looks like is actually from a very practical approach.
mm,
It's having the conversation, and I think we're losing the art of conversation. We're so at the moment engrossed on, well, actually, should we be in the office, out of the office, etc.
yeah.
And again, I've been exposed to many organizations that have moved away from that conversation and actually go, well, actually focus on what's the conversation we need to have in terms of the problem to solve.
Right.
And so that's where the team dynamics come in. And the problem to solve is how do we navigate ourselves and support each other through the
Mm,
change journey before we get to the what the change is going to mean. And obviously, team members who are affected by change are going to think on an individual basis, well, what
mm,
does that mean for me? What will happen to my role? What will happen to the way I work or the location that I'm working at? But the first and foremost is, well, how are you feeling about the change?
mm,
And actually enabling that conversation to manifest itself. So I've worked with a few organizations who, again, different scale of transformations, different scale of team dynamics. And it's been about, well, actually, who are you as a team, first and
mm,
foremost? Is that quite, can you identify that? Some people can, some people can't.
yeah.
And then getting them to articulate what they're feeling about the change. And it's quite fascinating because a lot of people kind of go, oh, well, how do you start that conversation? And I was like, well, you just ask them, how are you feeling about the change?
Yeah.
Well, what about psychosafety? And said, well, you put those parameters really clearly at the start of the meeting.
Mm,
And you kind of be very clear before you get to the meeting, before you get to the session, of what the session is about, why, the why.
mm,
And you might have some individual conversations so that when you get to the session, they've actually worked through their role to play in that session.
right.
Um, but I still haven't had one session, despite some challenges around psychosafety in terms of speaking up,
Right.
where we haven't just kind of picked a little bit and then it just opens up.
Right.
And actually, I find that, some people on the other side get a bit worried about, well, that's an avalanche of feelings. How do you deal with this avalanche of feelings? And it's like, well, actually, what you do is you listen, you're listening, and they actually much appreciate that someone is listening, someone is thinking about them and their own journeys.
Mm,
And then we start to kind of roll up our sleeves once we've had that first kind of therapeutic session to begin with, kind of go, okay, well, let's theme it up. And that's how I help them. Let's theme these feelings in terms of, what's working, what's not working.
Mm.
And everyone has a voice. So you facilitate it in a way that everyone, whether you're an extrovert or an introvert, is able to share their perspective. And it's not just, oh, well, let's just listen to each of you and pop it on a post-it.
Mm.
It's actually asking some questions around it. Well, why are you feeling that way? Where is that coming from, et cetera, et cetera. And then by theming it, you kind of then getting them to make sense of it
Right.
and going, oh, actually, I thought I was feeling this way and I was alone. Actually, now we can see this as part of a team construct, a team effort, team thinking. And then you move to the third stage, which is, okay, well, what are we going to do about it?
Right.
And it's them that come up with some of the solutions.
Yeah.
That starts that willingness to change. It's the getting the thought process and then the motivations around, well, okay, this isn't working for us, or this is what we need to do in preparation of. So how might we do that together?
Right.
And I've always found that then individuals will come to me and go, actually, how might you help us to continue that conversation? Because it was really useful and we don't want it to kind of fall to the side. But also, I've reflected on where I need some additional support,
Right.
or I reflected on my own triggers that were occurring during the meeting. And so you're just starting to open up the doors
Mm.
of that support, of that help that people need.
Yeah. Oh, that's amazing. Because I think one of my experiences in this, and sort of wrote a couple of notes here as well, is that quite often, particularly when you're asking those sorts of questions, you're having those sorts of conversations, which is how do you feel about this? If people aren't fully, and very few teams are psychologically safe in that moment until they start having the conversation, then either they don't necessarily really know because they haven't had the self reflection to get there, or they're not willing to share necessarily in the same way. But it's through that conversation that those things evolve and build and you start to see the patterns in the teams and see those themes coming through.
Absolutely. I recently I was doing I was facilitating a workshop. This was internationally. There were different people dialing in from different parts of different countries. And they were a leadership team. And so one of the challenges was they didn't connect often.
Right.
They are disparate in terms of location, and they're going through a lot of change. And actually, the industry, as well as the organization, is transforming.
Right.
And they wanted to get me to support them in that cultural change journey in terms of change leadership. How do they start thinking differently? And at the beginning, it was, good conversations, but quite, what's the word? Wasn't organic.
Right.
You could see everyone was kind of, I could just imagine through teams, everyone was just looking at each other, kind of, do I say something? Don't I say something? But it wasn't very long before someone said something,
Mm.
and then that shifted the conversation completely.
Yeah. No.
And it was through the questioning and that ability to pass the mic to everyone, that facilitation, and that genuine interest of, what is it that you're finding challenging, and how you're finding challenging, that person then was able, and he was a senior leader, senior position, and said, well, actually, I'm just reflecting on this question, and this is how I'm feeling. And very quickly, two things happened. One, that sense of, oh, well, I didn't realize that.
Right.
And actually, that empathy,
Yep.
as well as sympathy, but the empathy around it, and empathy and sympathy are two different things, but that empathy of, oh, well, I didn't know about this. I'm glad you shared it. So there's a lot of respect in that. I'm glad you shared it. But then the second thing is it got deeper
Mm.
because two other people then started to share their own experience of change, their own experience of how the team were leaning into change.
Mm.
And each person went one layer deeper.
Right.
either in the way that they said it, so it became a bit more emotive. So there was a little bit of either anger or a little bit of frustration or a little bit of um, actually just feeling like they were on their own and needing help. So there's a little bit of a reach out for help. And it's just human nature.
Mm.
But we just, being able to enable it so that they can adapt to change
Yeah.
and they can therefore respond rather than react to change is really, really key.
The power of that conversation, eh? It's fantastic. Um, One of
Mm.
the questions that I love asking this to my guests because I think people who spend their energy helping others perform at their best, it's like, how do you get your energy? What are the things that you do that keep you on top of your game and keep you sharp and knowing, that you're doing the right things?
Well, I do a lot. I mean, I keep active. So I go out for runs. That's my space
Right,
in a busy day. I've obviously got family commitments as well as, dealing with the work that I do. And so I run. I run to kind of just clear my mind. I've also started taking yoga. So I'm doing some things that help mentally and physically balance out the pressure
right,
of the pressure of what people are going through.
right.
And I put that in a broader context when you talk to everybody, whether
Mm,
they are um, leading through transformation in the world, in the business world, or even somebody that I meet on the ferry on my way to a client, they're feeling overwhelmed by the world, by the events of the world. Everyone is just much more conscious of what's going on because we live in a much smaller world. And the way that we're all being impacted by it, there's not one person that isn't impacted in some shape or form by one of these events. So you can feel quite overwhelmed as a
mm,
result of that. Um, and then I kind of just rely I guess my upbringing, that resilience
right.
of, okay, and that's what I was referring back to, that empathy versus sympathy.
Yeah,
It's being empathetic. I understand where you're coming from, but not taking all of that on my own
right.
shoulders.
Yeah.
I understand where you're coming from. And then it moves to boldness, bold action. So, what are we going to do about it? That positivity, um, where I still believe that despite everything else that's going on, despite the difficult change journeys that people are embarking on, and that sense of hopelessness in
Mm,
some cases, I have a firm belief around hope because what I do, how I do it, and why I do it is not only to help individuals for today, but also the next generation.
right.
I look at, if it is not for us, if it's not because of us, then who's going to do it?
Mm,
So that's what keeps me motivated. That's what keeps me going. Because it is, and I guess hold us accountable to it.
yeah.
Um, if it's not us, then who will it be?
What a challenge. What a question for us all to reflect on. So if you then, maybe this takes us nicely to the next question, if you could help any individual or team or organization with the skill set and the experience that you've got, who would you want that to be?
Well, look, I go really broad. Anyone, whether it's medium size, large size, small size organizations, leaders, whether you're CEO down, it's anyone who's going through that from a business perspective, the transformation.
Right,
And it's not just going through change, it's actually looking to how do I adapt to change
right.
and how do I lead through change, not leading change, lead through change, and really need help um, in that in the how. How do I lead through change? How do I become more adaptable to change? And how do I apply more of a what I call a strategic change discipline? So, what I mean by that is applying that enterprise change agenda that builds capability.
Right.
So, building the change muscle, the maturity, the capability that, regardless of where you are in an organization, everyone can do it,
Mm,
not just a core group of people being either CEO and exec level, as it's normally looked at that way,
Yeah.
or a project team.
Mm.
It's actually, for the business, by the business, and everyone has a part to play in the ecosystem of changing from a current state to a future state, of which that future state is a better world, and enabling them to feel engaged and part of that design of the future, regardless of what that future looks like, and regardless of, you know, where do you fit in that future?
Yeah.
It's actually being able to make the difference.
Yeah. And I love that piece of leading through change, not leading the change itself. That really speaks to me. Um, and so let's flip that on its head a little bit. If you could sit down then and have a coffee, have a meal. I didn't realize how much I missed the New Zealand coffee until I was back there, but some fantastic stuff. If you could sit down with anybody, have that conversation off the back of which you think that would really help me perform at the next level and really up my game, who do you want that to be?
Well, I've got an obvious, but then I've got actually a group of people that I would go to now. So my obvious one is, and has always been my hero, is Nelson Mandela.
Right.
For all the things that he kind of stood for and signaled, is exactly what I resonate with in terms of the how and the why. But if I was to put that in today's context, for me, it's the Gen Zs.
Right.
I think they are a fascinating group of youngsters. It's very easy for us to dismiss them. And I've been very curious and intrigued in terms of what makes them think the way that they think,
Right.
rather than dismiss, or as I hear other people do, well, they just need to do it this way. It's the what again.
Right.
And the reason why, for me, I'd love to sit down, and I do at the moment, kind of explore the mindset at play. Um, they are really pragmatic in their approach. They're realists. They're very conscious of the world and what's going on, but they're very practical and pragmatic. It's not about being radical. It's actually, how do we work together? So it has the same principles around the, change leadership, and applying strategic change discipline. They're very pragmatic. They want to collaborate, co-design together.
Right.
How might we make this a better place? They haven't got all the answers, but they're paving the way through it. They've got this belief that, when you talk to them, they have this belief. It's like, yep, the world is like this, and this particular situation is like that. For example, governments is
Mm.
a classic point of conversation at the moment.
Yeah.
Um, but they have the belief, the can-do attitude of, well, actually, we can change it.
Mm.
And so that sparks inspiration, because they come from a place of understanding, but they're going to a place of, we can actually just keep improving it, keep making it better. And if it's not us, then who is it going to be? Um, and they're really, really driven by positive impact. They're focusing on the things that really are a priority.
Mm.
And it's been fascinating conversations around just talking to them about their perspective of some things that we're struggling in society. And they're really upfront by going, well, actually, you're just focusing on the wrong things, because
Right.
this is where we think we should be focusing on.
Yeah.
So I'm continuing conversations with that group, and yeah, I'd still love to explore their mindsets, and they're the future leaders,
Yeah.
as far as I'm concerned. They're our future, and so I pose the question to a lot of my own age group of, don't judge them, and don't dismiss them, and actually just be curious.
Mm.
Go and have the conversations. Find out what it is that makes them tick and why,
Yeah.
and just see their mindset at play. It's fascinating.
Indeed. Indeed, and there's some amazing people out there, and young folk who are truly making a difference and continue to, and that's an inspiration to us all.
Yeah.
So if our audience was to go and leave this conversation remembering just one key point, what would you want that to be?
I think for me, change is constant. It will continue, right? What's different is the pace, the type of change, the ability, really, if I nail it, the ability to adapt to change and lead through it.
Mm,
Um, my biggest takeout is, or my biggest question around it is, how might you do it differently? How we've tackled change, how we've tackled transformation up until now. Um, I was doing a speaking event recently around plus ça change, c'est la même chose. You just keep doing the same thing over and over again, expecting a different outcome.
right.
Well, actually, we need to do something differently. And it's about the experience, not the process. It's about, finding mindsets at play, understanding those mindsets at play, and looking at how we might do things differently, moving from communication to engagement, moving from leadership to that change leadership, leading through change, um, and looking at how do you build trust. So it's actually just looking at how we might transform in a different way and focusing on the how, not the what, focusing on heart, and leaving the head to strategy and the hand to leadership or leaders. But it's the how, it's the heart, it's bringing humans front and center. It's people centered, it's human centered design. And we'll see if we have a different outcome.
Yeah. What a message to end on, and one key thing for us all to reflect on off the back of this amazing conversation. And if people want to find out more, if they want to continue this conversation for themselves, Alison, where do they go to connect with you?
I think the best place is through LinkedIn. I've got all my contact details there. And I've got other snippets as well in there that if people want to find out more, they can find out a little bit more about what I do and how I do it. But just reach out through the contacts. Happy to have an initial conversation and take it from there.
What an amazing conversation, and such a great topic, because we're all dealing with change, and change is not going anywhere. And as you say, it's only going to
Yeah,
get bigger, faster, more impactful. And that
yeah.
muscle to be able to lead through change is something that we can all learn from and help the next generation with. So it's been truly inspirational for me, this episode, and truly insightful. So thank you so much for being on the show today, Alison Ness.
Thank you very much. Really enjoyed our conversation.
Cheers.
Thanks for listening to today's episode. If you liked what you heard, then please give the podcast a rate, review, and share. I'm Paul Teasdale, and from sausage making to banking, oil and gas to Formula One, I help people perform. If you'd like to find out more and have a conversation, contact me via helpingpeopleperform.com.